title of this talk was why Kanban isn't enough. And maybe a better title of this would be why one visualization isn't enough, or one way to look at your work isn't enough. But as Tony Andy Maria, my business partner and writing partner, and I have found over the years of working in many different industries, is that if you're not visualizing your work, you just don't know what you're doing. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in. And that in that way, the Obeya ends up actually being quite transcendent. It's more than Lean, it's more than Kanban, it's more than Agile. It is, as Tim was saying earlier, a single place where we can go and actually not just see our work, but experience work together, experience discovery together, experience completion together, experience failure and recovery together. So Tony Ann and I talk about this a lot in our book, Personal Kanban, and it's even more in the new book, which is coming out in a little bit, called The Collaboration Equation. And we'll just move on here. So there's kind of three sections that I'm going to talk about here today, which is not visualizing your work at all, personal Kanban or Kanban visualizations, and then the Obeya as a whole. And for us, these are all part of something that is called the right environment. And the right environment is, in fact, your way. It's an intentional elucidation or instantiation of your culture, which means you actually have to know what your culture is, what you want it to be, and then what you need to visualize to make that culture happen. So we'll talk about that a lot. So first, you know, when we have no visualization, and just for clarity, no visualization looks like this. Okay, so this is how most people manage their work, is just no idea what is going on and hoping that someone will either tell them what to do, give them something to do, or at least not blame them for what is done. That's foolish, but it's the way business has been done forever. So no visualization, unfortunately, is a status quo. When we set up a Kanban or a personal Kanban, especially for people in software development, regardless of what we were doing before, no matter how agile we were, if we weren't visualizing how our work flowed, our work had no structure, even if we tried to smash it into 2-week intervals. So personal Kanban or Kanban started to give work a structure. We could see the value stream, we could see the impacts of bottlenecks, we could see the cycle time, the transaction time, where we learned, where things broke down. And that just pointed out to us that, wow, when you see something, you can actually interpret it, and you can interpret it together. So the Obeya for us just was created so naturally that we didn't give it a whole lot of thought. We're like, the Kanban's so cool. And what we did notice is around the Kanban, there were a lot of other visualizations happening, right? And they might be A3s, or they might be little tiny Kanbans for things that people were doing right now, or they might be pictures of the work, or they might be, you know, if it was software code, or if it was construction, pictures of the job site. That's an Obeya. So the Kanban itself, even back when we first started, it was never enough. And it was so never enough that even we, you know, instinctively knew that. So there's some resistance to this change. And we've talked about that throughout the years, is that human beings naturally resist change, even if it's good change, because they don't know what unknowns lie within that good change. And this is mostly true because we lack information. So we can't act with confidence because we don't have the information that we need to make good decisions. And so if you have no visualization, again, if you go back to this, and this is your visualization, then all you're relying on is what other people tell you. And that depends on if they know what to tell you, when to tell you it, how often to tell you it. And each time they tell you, it's a verbal transaction. It takes up your time. It's frustrating, and you will forget. And if something's visualized, it stays up on the wall and it's there and it's all good and stuff like that. So in Kanban or personal Kanban, we were communicating the system of work, but in the Obeya, we're actually establishing live information flows in support of the culture, in support of this right environment, right? So very quickly, I'm going to talk about what a Kanban is and what it looks like. Most people here already know that, so I'm going to do it really fast. And if you want to learn more, just go to personalkanban.com or talk to us or whatever. But for purposes of what we're doing right now, we just want to make it clear that professionalism, which is what we want to be professionals. It's not a solo sport, and it isn't a solo sport anywhere you go. Professionalism is always about collaboration. How am I serving the needs of the customer? How am I working with other people? How are we learning together? How are we making sure that information flows back and forth, that people can do what they want to do, need to do when they do it? How do people know when they can help? So we run into problems back here because people are making decisions without confidence because they don't have the context that they need, right? And this is due to something that's called the Zeigarnik effect. And the Zeigarnik effect says basically that when you're doing too much, you shut down. You only focus on the things that are at hand, and you don't stop thinking about tasks when you're working on them. So if you're working on 25 tasks at once, you never stop thinking about all 25 of those tasks, right? So what happens for most of us is we've got a whole bunch of demands on our time, which includes like our backlog or things that are expected of us and the things that we're currently doing. And probably also, if we've done a substandard job, things that we've done in the past that we know that people are going to come back and ask us about. So when we're thinking about what we're going to do next, we have this big jumble of stuff in our heads. It's like this thing here, and we have to tease out which one we want to do. And that requires us to analyze that, to think about who it's for, when it's due, how long it's going to take, how much of a pain it is, whether we like it, whether we don't like it, you know, who we have to work with, lots and lots of variables. So that bogs us down. So what we do in Kanban is pretty simply, we just say we're not going to play that game, and we're not going to, you know, have all of this stuff to do at once in one big jumble. But we're going to instead say we're only going to do 3 things at a time. 3 is a number. That number can be 4, it can be 6, it can be 2, it can be 1. It all depends on what your particular work is. So then we do this where we say, okay, I'm only going to work 3 things at a time, and then I'm going to focus on this, and I'm going to finish it, and I'm going to pull something else in. And now when I start something, it's not just because it's there and somebody's yelling for it, but it's because I actually have capacity to start that. So it becomes intentional. And that goes back to almost everything that Tim was talking about in his entire talk, is we are setting up a system, we are setting up a way, we are setting up a culture, not just of continuous improvement, but of professionalism, focusing on work, focusing on each other, finishing things with quality, and so forth. So we're actually setting up the system. So both in Lean and in Agile, we give people a bunch of tools, and then we expect them to magically become a culture of continuous improvement. But we can't do that if we don't focus on that culture and actually become a culture of continuous improvement. So we want to be able to see the context of our decisions. We want to be able to see the flow of our decisions. We want to be able to look at the Zeigarnik effect and say, hey, right now we're overloaded. What are we going to do about that? And in the Kanban, we can see the overload. But in an Obeya, where we have a bunch of different visualizations, we actually understand the role of the work, all the work that's being done, not just mine, but all of the work that's being done in multiple teams, so that teams don't become overloaded and bottlenecks, and human beings don't become overloaded and bottlenecks. We start to plan across the project. We start to plan across the company, right? So one of the huge failings of Agile is that Agile loves strong teams to the point that all of those teams become little tiny silos. And then they get dependencies, which are a figment of your imagination. They are a function of the fact that you have these really strong teams that are set up differently than your work demands that they need to be done. So Lean would come in and say, you need work cells, which Agile at one point would have called a cross-functional team, right? But Agile never has cross-functional teams. We like to talk about them, but we very, very rarely have them. So we need to collaborate. And that's what a cross-functional team is a collaboration is human beings coming together, professionals coming together in a group to provide value. And oddly enough, that's what work is, individuals in teams providing value, right? So we want to be able to see that work. So what might that look like? Well, that might look like this picture over here. Bing, there, it rendered and everything. So this is a quick Obeya, and you can see right here, look at that, it's a Kanban. It's a Kanban of a procurement process for a construction project in New York City. Up here is their timeline. Over here are decisions that they've made. Up here is the specific deliverables that they're going to need over the next 6 weeks. And they are collaboratively planning with other teams to make sure that the dependencies are impossible, right? They're making this Obeya their visualization. And then when the project actually becomes a projecty project, we'll just bring this to front. An Obeya might look something like this, where it's a huge room. You can see there's a Kanban over here, but there's very different visualizations around the room, all of which are based on nothing more than making sure that everyone in this room, regardless of their function, is fully informed of everything that's going on the project. They're not divided up into tight teams, but they all have responsibilities. And what happens in tight teams is that you don't get the benefit of seeing the mistakes, the failures, the learnings, the opportunities of teams that came before you. You don't, and funny thing about work is that when work is flowing through a stream, the work doesn't care where it is. the work is a living entity that lived through those previous situations, and the learnings that happen back there are always relevant. So if something's happening over here in setting the foundations for this building, and Nicole over here is the superintendent of structural steel, or even drywall, something that won't come for a while, knowing the problems that happened back here help her anticipate the problems that she will have in the future. Crazy, isn't it? I wish everyone did this because it's awesome. So collaboration is very difficult when you can't see anything at all. With Personal Kanban, it's pretty easy to collaborate in your team, but anyone who's used an online Kanban tool or worked in a project of any size knows that they very quickly become a huge sea of tickets, and you can't tell what's going on. So, I honestly believe that you can't have a project without having a Kanban in it somewhere. That's just like a straight statement. But if that's all you've just got one, then you're not actually seeing your work. You're just kind of seeing some flow. So in the Obeya, we're not just visualizing and managing, but we're actually thriving on collaborative opportunities. So footings are being put in. Nicole sees that she can help, and she goes over and helps. It's not her part of the project, but right now they're the bottleneck, and she can dynamically reallocate herself to go work on that bottleneck. In knowledge work, that never happens. Never. Even when it's blindingly obvious that it needs to happen. Okay. And this is because ultimately, we're really worried all the time about agency and psychological safety. I guess I thought psychological safety was next. It's over here. But The reason that we're worried about psychological safety and agency is because we don't know what we're doing. If you know what you're doing and you can act with confidence, that is both psychological safety and agency. It's not something we can go to a 2-day class and suddenly magically obtain. It's something that we have to make part of our way, part of our right environment, part of our visualizations. So for this group, whenever they go into this room, they see all sorts of opportunities that they have for professional action. And that's awesome. And this team working on this hospital in New York was such a highly performing team, literally the most highly performing team I have ever seen. And I've worked on a lot of projects in a lot of countries, in a lot of different verticals. This team had it down, and it was because they used this room constantly to honestly communicate with each other. So what were they communicating? Well, they're communicating information. Let's make this a little tighter so we can focus on it. So any of those visualizations in that room have to communicate something. And they can't just communicate stuff, because has anyone who has ever set up an Obeya, or especially an Obeya in something like Miro, knows is that they can very quickly become just a big pile of crap. Lots of different visualizations that people slap on the walls, forget that they're there. They stay up all the time. Everyone's afraid to take them down. The room isn't cold. The visualizations don't have purpose. So we want to make sure that we set up visualizations that can actually achieve a purpose, that can actually underwrite the culture of continuous improvement that we want to create. So each one should tell you state, which is basically just everything in that Kanban. Who's doing what? Is it flowing? Is it stuck? Who's working with whom? What's simple? What's complex? What's complicated? What's ready for release? What was released and came back and to haunt us? You know, the state of the work. Now, the state of the work doesn't give us any value if it doesn't cause us to act. Okay, it can't just be a rolling status meeting, because that's boring. And we're not at work to be bored. We're at work to solve problems and to do interesting stuff. So Lean is constantly looking for, how do you develop your standard work? Agile couldn't care at all about standard work. And I would love to move the needle for that somewhere in between. What I want is for us to understand what our standard work is, so that we can better do our complex work. So that when there is a trigger, an emergency comes up or something happens, when that trigger happens, it doesn't freak us out. It doesn't ruin our sprint commitments. It doesn't ruin our plans, but we actually have built a system that is resilient enough to create the capacity to actually do work. So learning complexity, creating an A3 is not extra work. It is your work. Assembling things is not your job. Okay. So triggers are really important. So we want our Kanbans or whatever there are up there to show the professionals in the room, here is a way that you can act that can help the project, that can help your customers, that can help your colleagues, that can help you, right? Here is how you can help. Okay. The other thing that we want, the third thing that we want visual management to show, whatever those visualizations are on the wall, is direction. And this is where we're coming from. These are our plans, our backlogs, stuff that we know that we need to do. Okay. So that even includes estimates, in case there are some no estimates people here. Estimates are necessary and they go here in direction. Okay. The problem with estimates is that estimates become promises or commitments. So you have to balance your direction, the thing that you think is going to happen, with your narrative, which is the thing that actually happened or is happening. What are you learning? What derailed you? What awesome change happened? What catastrophic changes happened? And The reason that the visual controls need to show this is because part of the Zeigarnik effect is that when you finish a task, you kind of get closure and you move on and you forget about it. And even though there are other psychological or behavioral economical constructs about remembering bad experiences, we're also quite adept at sweeping things under the rug. So what we do frequently on projects is we're rolling along in our plan and we're like, my plan's awesome, I love my plan. And then all of a sudden you're derailed by something. And it could be COVID, it could be a snowstorm, it could be a power outage, meteor strike, whatever it is. And what we do every time is we're like, man, if it wasn't for that meteor strike, everything would have been fine. And then we go off to the next project and we're like, oh man, if it wasn't for that blizzard, everything would have been fine. And then we go off to the next project, we're like, oh man, if it wasn't for that whatever, everything would have been fine. And what we don't realize is it's something crappy happens in every single project that we have. And it's a good idea to remember what those crappy things are. So in the future, you can set up triggers that can elegantly deal with them when they arise. And that's what professionals do. So one of my favorite stories about my favorite professional is while recording an album with Miles Davis that was all improvised, Herbie Hancock was playing the keyboards like this one here, and he messed up. So he plays and then he messes up and he immediately sits back and kind of does this and takes his hand off the keyboard. And then Miles Davis, he goes like blah, 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 and then so Miles Davis takes his horn and goes blah, 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 and he turns it into the rest of the song, right? So he elegantly recovered from what Herbie Hancock thought was a failure state and turned it into value. We want to know and we want to remember what these states are that previously might have ended our careers and say, hey, I'm going to engage now in comfortable change. We're going to notice that this stuff happens. So when we go back here to this room, everything up here, everything on these walls isn't really here for the standard work. It's here for the weird. And it's here for the weird by calming the standard work. It's making sure that we're all always informed of the easy stuff, because we know how many times when we visualize our work like this, that the easy stuff becomes a horrible problem because somebody didn't tell somebody else something, because handoffs weren't clean, because one group became a bottleneck and no one knew. Okay. So ping back over here. Culture. This is that right environment. This is your way. This is your dough. We want to get together at the beginning of every project and then subsequently, like maybe every 6 weeks or 6 months, whatever the cadence might be, but to get together and define our culture. Because our culture, not our process, is ultimately what builds our product. And we always think, oh, our culture will just magically create itself. Or we talk about our culture and then we think we're done. Okay. Our culture has elements in it that we value, and those values are our interactions, the interactions that Tim talked about. So whether that is brought about by making sure that you're constantly becoming better professionals by upskilling, or whether you're making time for other people to repair, to take time off, to take time with their kids, to celebrate victories, whatever those might be, our culture is extremely implementable. And if we don't implement it and we don't improve it, it will become just as mediocre as the rest of our work. So don't do that. So professionalism, I talked about that a lot, and it's a huge thing, but there's only 4 quick boxes down here. But professionalism is why we wake up in the morning to go to work. We want to have impact. We want to do a good job. We want to be able to use our skulls and the wetware inside them when we get to the office. The Obeya is specifically providing information to allow professionals to act with confidence, which is kind of a combination of agency and psychological safety. The creation of your Obeya and the systems around it specifically focus on making sure that there is a system that is undeniable, that doesn't allow people to become bad actors, voluntarily or involuntarily, on purpose or completely accidental. Right? So, you know, when so Tony Ann and I are faculty members of the Lean Enterprise Institute. And one of the biggest frustrations that anyone at LEI has, any of us have, is we go in, we start engaging in some awesome lean change. It changes. It's awesome. Everybody's happy. New manager comes in and it all gets flushed. And then we're like, I hate that manager. Well, the system that we set up wasn't resilient enough. It wasn't clear enough. It wasn't ingrained enough to make it difficult to change. It was literally our personalities that drove that change. So if we want to set up any kind of lean system or agile system or whatever we want to call it, that has any kind of resiliency, that has any sustainability, whatever buzzwords we want to use, that scales, that has synergies, that, you know, tastes better than new Coke, then we need to create a sense of professionalism by making our visualizations build undeniable systems. When we do this, then this happens. When we do this, then this happens. And then we want to make those other people really work if they're going to derail that. Like, they're going to have to come in and be so mean that massive attrition occurs. Honest to God. So in professionalism, we want to make sure that everybody's always learning, that that course correction is part of the job. It is the job. The job isn't, I made this plan and it has this Gantt chart and we're just going to roll, but that it actually has that job. Okay. And then the last bit here is identity. Who are we? Who am I? Who is the group? Where can we make decisions? Our zones of control, our spheres of influence. Who are we as a team? And how do we transcend who we are so that we don't become a silo? How do we make sure that we have identity, but that identity is a healthy identity? All of these things are in all of these visualizations. So I think want to tell 2 stories about this room really quickly. The first is that these rooms generally don't happen in construction or anything else. So it's easy to look at this and say, yeah, it's construction. They do that all the time because they have like plans and pieces of paper. No, they don't. Most construction projects are run by people screaming at other people. That's the major management paradigm of construction. This project, a couple of very remarkable things happened on it. The first was that in general, people in the trades will come into the trailer for 2 reasons: coffee and coffee. That otherwise they try and stay away from the trailer because that's where the controllers live and they don't want to be controlled. On this project, so many tradespeople just down to individual workers on the job site, came into the trailer constantly to look at the Obeya. So much so that Turner built a second Obeya on the job site so that they could create more visualizations for themselves and have a place to run their daily huddles. The right environment of this group, this group of people right here were so dedicated to making a project that was safe for all professionals, including the professionals in the trades, that right environment spread throughout the entire project. For someone like me, that is every Christmas from 2 to 12 years old smashed into one, microsecond. It was such a moment. It was such an incredible moment. To the second story about this group, and trust me, I've got tons of them, and they're in the book that's coming up. But the other thing was that at one point, they had an emergency, and there was a stakeholder or a person from the city who was asking for a certain piece of information. That certain piece of information wasn't something that they really needed, but they were asking for it. So there was the annoyance that they had, that the team had to like go create this information for them. But then there was also just this sense of professionalism. It's like, okay, it's a stakeholder has a need. I'm not going to judge the need. I'm going to get it done. It took everyone you see in this room like the better part of a morning to generate the information that this person needed. And they did it without complaining. They did it methodically. That's awesome. Okay. But what's more awesome is the second that they got that person out of the building, they all got together in this room. And then they said, wow, that sucked. How can we make sure that that never happens again? And they built a system that would allow everybody to take an iPad out into the field. And the moment that anybody asked for anything, they would immediately have a PDF or a design or a document or something, which meant that they very quickly overhauled their whole document management system. They created an interface on their own to make this work. It was gorgeous. That wouldn't have happened on other projects. Like literally on other projects, they would like they'd like burn the regulator in effigy or something. Or they might go have beers, but they wouldn't make sure that it never happened again. And it's because their standard work was calmed that they were able to deal with that trigger, and they were able to make that uncomfortable moment comfortable change. They understood that they had their own zone of control that was aimed at quality and learning and improvement. And that if they let that thing happen again, it would be culturally destructive. That's so awesome. I absolutely adore that. So I'm just gonna go ahead and grab the last three here. Work doesn't fit. So if you're spending your time smashing work into 2-week intervals, work doesn't fit, it flows. Okay. We want to be able to see workflow. So if you're working in a system where you're doing 2-week iterations, that is a strong batch and queue system, which can work for short periods of time, like maybe 2 weeks. But over time, your flow will break down because work doesn't care about your 2-week iterations, and it never will. So in no visualization or in otherwise restricted systems, flow is literally luck. It just happens sometimes. And there's two types of flow. So there's the workflow. here goes my task, and it's flowing through the system. And then there's psychological flow, which is, I don't feel any hindrance to getting this work done. I am an awesome professional and I know exactly what to do right now. So the more that we're visualizing the work in both the Kanban and the Obeya, we're not just making flow possible, but we're actually encouraging the creation of environments that allow both types of flow. So again, something happens in footings. Nicole is working on some other part of the project. She can go back and help the people who are working in those original pilings. She can help them when they need it, and she can help their workflow. Okay. On the shop floor, in a manufacturing environment, there's a very set order of operations for where things are stored, when they're gathered together, when they're assembled, when you QC them, and when you ship them. In knowledge work, life is much more arbitrary. Life loves to thwart our plans, and that's becoming more and more true on the shop floor too, because more and more products aren't being assembled, they're being printed. Change can happen in a nanosecond. So we want to make sure that we're no longer just assuming what our outcomes are or were, but what we're measuring them when we're making them more predictable. And that doesn't, and there's a word there, there's more is a word. More predictable. Now we're making them predictable because we weren't going to be able to make them predictable. But we are going to do is not make the predictable unpredictable by not talking about it. And we are going to be able to act on the unpredictable. And then the last bit, understanding, again, no standard work at all when you're not visualizing, no matter how much you think there is, no matter how many forms you come up with, no matter how many spreadsheets you build, if you're not visualizing your work, you have no standard work. You have things that you do for a short period of time that fall apart. I'm Jim, and these are my categorical statements for the day. So up here in the Kanban, you can get one or maybe two types of standard work, a couple things maybe in a swim lane. But when you start to get the Obeya, and you start to get a room like this, and the room can certainly be digital, but tactile is better. When you get a room like this, you have flow here, you have flow here, you have flow here, you have flow here, you have understanding here. And all these different conversations become the larger conversation of the project, as opposed to your conversation about your individual silo. So if you just imagine this whole room empty, and each of these things being in someone's drawer, that's how your work is managed without an Obeya. No one knows what's going on. And I posit to you that that's not helpful. All right, so better wait for some comments here or some questions. Go ahead and go to the last paragraph, the last slide here. So these are the types of systems that we teach about and build at Modus Institute. It's our online school. We have a global community of nearly 1,000 people now, all of whom are interested in building real systems of work. So learning from Agile, learning from Lean, learning from Prince2, learning from PMI, learning from Drucker, learning from all these things that came before, certainly learning from Deming. But we are interested in saying, what is the unique needs of your team or your teams, and how do you build the systems that support those? So these little codes are here. So this is $125 off our annual subscription, and this is $500 off of our certification. And it would have helped if this particular slide had the modusinstitute.com on it. Let's put it up here. There. .com. How's that? So please do come and join us. We love thinking about humane work. We love thinking about ways to make all of this stuff work for everybody. And we have brilliant brain trust that is gathered to do exactly that. So I see that there's only one question. Actually, it's a comment. It's not even a question. So if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat. And I'll call up the chat here. So the new book should be out in August. Working very hard to get the book out in August. It might be a little bit earlier than that. And if you look on Amazon in a few weeks, the pre-purchase page will be up so that you could pick it up, and then it will just arrive when it gets there. It has a detailed discussion about how to build a right environment, how to build a collaborative team, and most importantly, how to have kind of what we call collaborative leadership, because we believe that the term leader is a fairly destructive and toxic term, but leadership is pretty awesome. And when you have a strong leader, it kills agency, it kills psychological safety. But when everybody has the ability to express leadership, that is a thing. That is a huge thing. And that's what we saw in spades at that Coney Island Hospital project. Okay. So question here is needing to be up here on the screen where the text is bigger. Okay, my current challenge is getting people to understand that Obeyas are more than just a bunch of dashboards that you meet in front of every 2 weeks and then forget. Yes, this is our problem with just about everything. God knows that that type of behavior is ridiculously common. And it happens when the room isn't owned by the people who are using it. And ownership is something that is assumed. It is not granted, told, dictated. So you can't say like, that's your Kanban, go use it. That's your Obeya, go stand in it. Any more than it works to, tell a 14-year-old, that's your room, go clean it. The way that we get these things to work is we don't start with the Obeya. We start at the beginning, which is the right environment, which is the culture. And we set out initially and we do a few quick steps. The first step is we do a value stream mapping exercise with the team. And that value stream mapping exercise is different from the traditional lean one. Yeah, we're interested in the flow of work and where there's problems and where you want to fix them. But what we're really interested in is where are the collaborative opportunities or the opportunities to treat each other better. And we find that when we focus on those very quickly, the VSM becomes an even more emotional, deep experience for people. And we move on from there to going through a 4-step exercise where we define what the culture of the team is. And then a subsequent exercise after that, where we do what we call a communications plan. But what it basically is now you understand the flow of your work and what you need to know and how you need to talk to each other. You know what you want as a group. You want better onboarding, better training, more vacations, a dog, whatever it might be. Now, what is the information that you require in order to be a professional? And they will come up with tons of things that they need. And then we ask them, okay, where does it currently hide? And they're like, well, it currently hides in Google Docs and Slack and, 22 million different places. It's like, okay, let's build a place where all that information can live so that you can achieve the culture you want that can support the work that you get done. So we kind of work our way back again. What do you need to know in order to be good to each other, in order to get the work done? Then they build an Obeya that actually is responding to their personal needs, not just to the need of lean or the need of agile or because their coach told them to, but because they specifically said, our work will suck if we don't know this. Here's how we're going to know it. Then you enforce that, or you get them to enforce that. You say, okay, now how often are you going to update these boards? And if the answer is anything other than in real time, then you whack them with the Ono stick. You say, no. How are you going to update this in real time? And then how are you going to turn this into an interactive part of managing the project? So this Obeya room is their only meeting room. All the activity in this company or on this project happens in this room, right? So now anytime they're in here, everything is discussed in the context of everything else. It's ridiculously relevant. That's how we push that. Okay, so next question is I love standing in front of my tactile board. I found a great case for digital boards, where many are, and this person, Genevieve, works with volunteer groups, and they don't have a lot of centralized workspace, so they need a digital Obeya. And she's just noting that the digital Obeya has been a game changer for them. So this is what we found for digital Obeyas, is that we've done 2 internal ones at Modus, and we've set up a bunch of other ones for our clients. And some of them have been in Miro, and some of them have been in iObeya. And Miro, and they're both great for one main reason. And it is the reason why we don't recommend that people use tools like Jira, even if Jira will give you statistics and interface with other things. Jira doesn't let you annotate. And the only reason for an Obeya is annotation. So Jira only tells you what you already know, and then what you learn, it hides in the cards. It brings me pain. It is a painful thing. And so this is true for Trello and Asana and the other online Kanban tools. They're one visualization focused on one management paradigm that in no way relates, to your work. So this is our system in iObeya. And as you can see, we have different sections. So their paradigm is that this is the Modus Cooperandi room. So this is our corporate room. This is a wall. So this is our daily operations wall. This is our creation and product wall. This is our sales wall. This is our PR wall. So all of the different things that we do are visualized in one way or another. And you can see that some of them are Kanban-like, some of them are calendar-like, some of them are free-form. And that's because that's what the information needs, right? And let me just zoom in on this. It has nothing in it to show you the what I consider to be the completely ridiculous killer feature of this, which is, I'll make a quick card here. And the card says, buy batch Christmas present. Right, and then I make the card. Okay, so there's the card. We'll zoom in on it so that we can actually read it. Okay, now let's just say, for example, the Tony Ann is talking to Batch on the phone, and she finds out that Batch hates all food. So she might put, for God's sakes, no food. Okay. And then we can attach that to the card. We'll attach it like that. Okay. Here's the cool feature. Watch this. Oh my God. It works like the world. Okay, so this is super important, because now if we zoom way out here, and I was going to pull this card, I know that there's like this colored sticky on here that is a call to action for me to go in and look and make sure that I don't make some sort of a mistake. So when Tony Ann and I are working on creation of product, publication schedule, you can see here, there aren't any right now. But let's just say that right now, Tony Ann is reviewing this video here, right? And what she would do if she found something to change in that video is she would quickly say, like, at minute 2:14, change flyout to read Deming and not dumbing. And then she would drop it right here on the ticket. And then when I go in to do work, I know that those orange stickies are for me. It's super immediate, but this is the way that your digital boards have value. It's not that they look like anything that some person with a book told you to create. It's that you're able to communicate with each other effectively. So again, if we go back over here to this room, this board is nothing but pictures of the pilings. This board is a schedule. This is a Kanban. This is a calendar. These are some charts and graphs. Different information needs to be presented in different ways. And all of these need to stay relevant to the people in the room. So there you go. Let's see. Last one, I think. Is this the last one? I don't know. I don't know what time it is. I'll go until somebody tells me to stop. I see a lot of information in the room. How do you bring focus on what's most important? So this is the big problem with the Miro board, is that Miro is, well, I'll show you. Miro looks like this after a while. And not a very long while. So Miro is so free formed and you can do so much with it that, like, so literally all of the presentations that I have done over the course of COVID are in this deck. This is everything I've ever done. So if you ask me any question, I can go back and I can show you, completely different boards from completely different talks, right? It's awesome for that. But what it's terrible at is making sure that you don't get visual clutter. So here, what we did to avoid that and to drive us to what's important is we make sure that we have sections where in this board, so in our daily operations boards, we know that we have stuff we want to talk about in the huddle. We have stuff that Julie's working on to get the podcasts up. We know that there's stuff that Tony Ann's working on in her side projects. We know that this is the work that we're doing with our marketing people. And we know that this is our basic work. And you can see there's even some red tickets in there where you know that there is a comment that somebody's left for somebody else. So now, not only do I know what's important because it's in the right place, but I know what's important because it was annotated in a way that draws my attention to it. That's awesome.